In this video, I cover the basics of make.com. So if you're not familiar with Make or you're just starting to use Make, these are the basic things that I think everybody needs to know when building out automations. I cover over step numbers, filters, error handling, triggers and actions, passing data from one, transforming data. This is the make.com for beginners. So if you're new and you're trying to understand Make better, this video is for you. Thanks so much for watching. If you're new here, my name is Chris. I am the founder of Boolean Automation. We are a consulting company that works with painting companies to automate their business processes. But a lot of the videos that I make are valuable for any business operator that is trying to make things more efficient. It's just that the softwares that I'm reviewing and talking about oftentimes pertain mostly to the painting industry, but they could very well pertain to other industries as well. So if that's a value, you can like and subscribe, but let's get into this video. So first, I set up a super simple automation here. It's triggered every minute by the Google Form module. And so every minute it goes and checks for responses in Google Forms. And then there's a simple transform of some data in Google Sheets. And then it sends an email based on the information that it found in Google Sheets and some of the information that was submitted in the Google Form. So first thing to understand is every single scenario is going to have a trigger. And in the way that Make works is that some triggers they have different interval options. So this one is it's going to be running every minute. Sometimes you can do it every day. You can do it on demand. On demand does not mean instant. So there's different triggers that you can use if you want an instantaneous, the moment like a webhook comes in or something, but this one is going to run every minute. So it's important to understand, first of all, you have to have your trigger. What is going to kick off the automation? Then you're going to have a series of actions that will happen. And so the actions are performed by additional modules. So you can see here that I can click add, and I can add in any of the pre-built connections that Make has. They also have custom like webhooks or post commands that you can pull in if you want to integrate with a different tool or software. But there's going to be a series of actions that happen. And then you have your email step, or the last action in this case is an email step, and it's going to send an email. So that's the most basic thing to understand about an automation. Some other things that are important that took me a while to figure out are whenever you see one of these numbers above, means that there was actually data that came in and was processed. So you can open that up to see what data was input and output in a given step. Another thing here is that the number next to each one of these, so inside this box, this is number 1, this is number 3, number 4. The reason you might be asking, where's number 2? And that's because when I was building this, I made a module and then I ended up deleting it and I added another one. So this is sequential. If I added another module here and said, I want to add one here, you'll see that now this is module 5. If I add another one here, this says, no, this is module 6. So we've got number 4, 5, and 6. If I delete these modules and then I add another one, and there we go. Now we're going to be at module 7 because I have already made that. So the reason that's important is that the number of the module never changes once you add it. It's going to remain that number in this particular scenario. The reason that that's important is because in a given module, I can take outputs from a previous step. So you can see here that I'm taking the output, and I can tell because of number 1. And when I hover over this, it shows you I'm taking the output from number 1 here. Or in step 3, this one here, Google Sheets, I can see I'm taking an output from step 3. So when you are using the modules here, it's important to know each one of these numbers is unique. It's referencing that step. But if you're ever wondering why steps might be out of order or something, like for example, if I had another Google Sheet lookup here and I moved this, I wanted it over here, I could end up theoretically having step 3, step 8, and then step 4. So just keep in mind that they don't have to be in it is normal if they end up not in chronological order. So some other key things here, you can rename any of these. So I recommend that when you're building an automation to rename it, to make sure that instead of just saying Google Sheets, we could actually right click, click rename, and then you can say look up person's email, phone, and prefix. So we do that. Now it's labeled like that. So I can remember, oh yeah, that's what I was doing. And so every one of these can be renamed. When you right click on the modules here, a couple other things, we can clone it. So if we have a step that's pretty close to what we want to do again, we can clone that again. You could add a note, which can be valuable, just like this is used to look up information on the person that was submitted in the Google form. So in a separate video, I'll explain how and why I made this particular automation, but that's just another feature there. The other thing that is very important is that at any point in this process, you can click on this little gear and you can set up a filter. So any one of these can have a filter, and the filter could be something like, if I click set up filter, the condition could be that I want the name of the employee to equal Chris. So what that means is that in this, as it's running, if the name of the employee that comes out of this Google Sheet is not Chris, it will not continue. I could also do things like I want the name of the employee to exist. So if it returns a row that didn't have a name, it would not proceed forward. So it's important to understand that each one of these, you've got, any one of these connections is an opportunity to add a filter to stop an automation from continuing on. And let's say you change your mind and you don't want that filter anymore. You just come in here, click the X, and then say okay, and then it switches it back so there's no filter in between there. Another option would be adding in a router here. So I can do two things. Either I can insert a module into one of these. So I could click here and say add a module, and now it just moved everything over, and I can add in another Google Sheet lookup or something. And I'm going to go ahead and delete that module. Or I could add in a router. Now, a router is a tool that you can use to basically, it's sort of like a filter, but it can send data just depending on what happens. And a router actually an automation will go down as many routes as the filters that it meets. So for example, if I have this router here, I could say this one I'm going to call if ice cream, let's do if prefix is known. And then we're going to go here and grab the prefix and say if it exists. So that could be the first step here. And then I could also I'm going to clone this module, bring it down here, and I could then, as I drag it close, it's automatically going to connect. And then for this one, I could say that I want to set up a filter, and I could say this could be if the prefix is unknown, or I could say if the phone number is unknown. So then this one would be if the phone number from the email or from the Google Sheet lookup does not exist. So this one's only going to continue if we know the prefix, so that we're saying if it exists. This one's only going to continue if the phone number is not known. So if we have a blank, then it would go down this route. You can also create a module here that would say, so actually let's change both of these to say that we want we're going to change this one to say if this does not exist. So if prefix is unknown. So if the prefix is unknown, if the phone number is unknown, and then we could clone this one more time and make another one here that says this would be the fallback. So that's another important thing to know. When I click on this, I can choose, do you want this to be the fallback? A fallback route is used if it didn't go through any other route. So I could say yes. Now this is nice because I could have a filter that if one of these is unknown, it's going to take that. But if everything is known, then it's just going to default down this path. So let me delete this Google Sheet module here. And again, keep in mind that the numbers here are increasing. So these paths here are saying when a submission comes in, it's going to go down, and if it can't find the prefix, it's going to go here, and then it would send this email. So what I could do to test this out would be I could write prefix unknown, and then I'll just say the record selected didn't have a prefix. So that's the message is going to say prefix unknown. The email is still going to be sending from this email. I could change this to default to, if I've got an error, I don't want to email the person whose email is here. I could just have it go back to my personal email. And so say review. And so there's my personal. And so if there's an error, it's going to go down this route and tell me, hey, we don't know the prefix. Now, because I've modified this, and this is going to be closer to what I want here, this would actually be a great idea to clone this module, delete this one, and use this one instead. So now I'm going to say this is the phone number is unknown. So I'm going to say phone unknown, and we could say did not have a phone. So hopefully this is making sense what we're doing here, and that is setting up the error handling for this simple automation. So now let's go, I'm going to go one step further and say, let's say that it does take this route. And actually let's go ahead and just run an example here. So I'm going to always, whenever you're done making edits, you can click this back arrow and it's going to ask you, do you want to save? So I click Save Changes. And now we're looking at the entire automation. So now what we can do is go to the Google form, and I'm going to submit my answers here. So I'm going to, first let's go to this sheet, and I'm going to put in one that doesn't have a phone or a prefix. So both of those are going to be blank. I'm doing that on purpose because I want to show you what happens here. So if I go to the form and I select Steve and then say, see if these router options work. So I click mint chocolate chip and I submit this. Now we're going to watch because this runs every minute. So we'll see if in the next minute or so this processes. And you will see when it runs in real time that all these little dots are popping up and that it's actually processing. So in just a minute, we should actually get to see this process. And here it goes. So it's processing. And again, exactly like what we wanted. It ran, and now as this is a great thing for debugging. I could go in here and see, okay, so the data that came in was here. I can see the answers. So I can expand all these and see, okay, so mint chocolate chip was selected. So as I'm looking through to make sure my automation is working correctly, I can see, okay, Steve came through. Then it went to this one, and it looked up Steve. So the input was this. Right. So the input that it was going is Steve, and it was trying to find something that was equal. So it found Steve, it returned the email, Chris, and that was all that it returned because the other columns were blank. Right. So now you can see that in this step, it had a prefix that didn't exist. So this module worked. And if I pull up my email here, you will see that I should have, if this worked the way that we intended, I should have received two emails, one that says prefix unknown. So let me pull that up. So I pull up my email here, and as you can see, I got one email that says, hey, the prefix was unknown, and the other email that says the phone number was unknown. So that worked exactly like we wanted. So that's all good. Now let's go down. So the final thing here would be, let's say that in the sheet here, we're going to add another person of, we'll say Chris. And let's just say that we provide a bad email so we don't even have a name. It just says @Boolean review. And we've got a number here, and we say Mr. And so it's going to look up Chris. It's going to get a bad email address that's not valid. I need to make sure to add Chris to the form here. So we add one more. All right. So we've got Chris here. Now this one is also important because, this is a great example. So I'll show you, I submit this, I click Chris, and we're saying test and mint chocolate chip. So I submit. Now keep in mind in the automation, I do have a phone and a prefix here. So the automation, when it runs, we should be able to see that it will process. It's not going to go down these because these are both known. It's going to go down this one, but the email that I gave it is bad. So it should error out and give me a notification that it did not work the way that it was supposed to. So this is good. We'll see. And look, we got an error. So this is the final thing I want to show is just debugging. This is a great tool or just thing to be comfortable with, but I can go into the diagram here and look at the history. And when I look here, I can see that it's telling me an invalid email address. So it's giving me a specific thing here. This cross means that like step 4 and step 13, this do not enter sign or whatever icon that is, that doesn't mean that was an error. It just says that didn't run because it didn't go through those filters. The error is going to have this exclamation mark, and it says that the invalid email address was submitted. So now what that means is that this would have actually stopped the automation and said this couldn't send. And it makes sense because we gave it an email address that was just at Boolean review. It doesn't make any sense. But what you can do is you can add, or if you right click here, we need to go back to the diagram to edit this. So we want to go to this step and we can click. All right, so what we need to do is we go back to the diagram here, and the diagram is where you're going to edit your modules. So in this step, I could say, because, and this is like, as you're running automations, you're not going to think of all these error scenarios from the get-go. But whenever you run into an error, I would always ask, okay, what could we do to resolve this so that if something happened again, we are able to alert somebody instead of the automation just stopping, someone would find out that something's wrong. So what you can do is you right click on the module. So let's get out of this, right click, and I can say add error handler. So notice that right here, this is a hollow that's not filled out. All of these are filled out. So if they're solid color, that means that they're actually a path that's going to run under normal conditions. The hollow is an error that you want to do something with. So it gives you a couples where you could roll back and try it again. You could pause everything. You could just ignore it and resume, and it would say that there was no issue. Keep in mind that in this case, the email still wouldn't have sent. Or you can have it take a totally different path. So if I know that the most common reason that we go down, that we have an error is because the email is invalid, then I could have an error handler like branch and say that I want to send an email. And keep in mind, this is saying when it goes down this route and it hits an error, we want to then take this route only when there is an error that happens. And this one could say email failed to send. And then I could go into the content here, or let's just say error at step 12. And then I could even put in, you can see, because I have an error message here, I could say that I want to include the error message that actually was created. So this was the error that we received. And I could type in, the type was a data error, the message was this, and the detail was this. So now what would happen, and that's another thing, great little learning thing. Anytime you see this asterisk, that means you haven't saved the module. So I click on it, and then I can click OK to actually save it. Oh, and I need to add a recipient. So I'll send this again to myself, chris@booleanreview.com. And I click OK. So those are the processes here. You've got so now when this runs, everything else is filled out. We know all the variables, but whenever we run into an error on this step in particular, we want it to take this route. So we could go try this one more time. I'm going to go back here and hit save. And then we're going to submit the same example, use Chris again, and then test again, and mint chocolate chip, submit. And we're going to watch this run one more time. And what do you know? Didn't turn it on. So we got to turn it on. All right. So you can see here that what happened, again, it goes down this path. It has it says that there was an invalid email address, and there was actually 2 submissions that processed at the same time. That's why it says 2 there. So then here we've got that this one did send, and I can go check my email and see, yep, it did come through and says, this is the error validation failed one parameter, and then it says failed a parameter and the invalid email address in the parameter 2. So now we have, again, there was an error, but from the history of that automation, because we handled the error, it says that it was a success. So it successfully ran. It did what we said. It's not going to say like this didn't work. So I think those are the most critical things to understand in Make when you're building automations. The hollow branch here means that it's only going to operate in the case of an error. And then remember, you can have it actually do something, or you could also add an error handler, or sorry, I could switch this. Let's say if I didn't want this one, I could add an error handler and the step could be resume. So like that is an option as well, that I could say, hey, when I get to this, the message ID could just be, error message or whatever, and then it's going to continue. So that's another way that you could handle that. And lastly, if I went back to, let me delete this module and add in an error handler, that would be the email. Again, I do have the option to add a filter to say, oh, maybe you don't. So filters are only for real paths. The error has to take all outputs. So that's a good thing to know. I just thought of one other thing to point out. When you're putting together the email like this, if I right click on this and I unlink something, you'll notice that when these values are grayed out, it means that the data is not connected somewhere. There's missing information that's not coming through. In this case, it's because I just unlinked these modules. But anytime you're looking and you see the grayed out, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's an error, but you should find out why is that missing. So when I connect this, you'll see that all the dynamic variables that I inserted are filled with color and they're working. So that's all the way that it should be. So hopefully this was valuable. If there's other questions that you have, I'd love to hear about those in the comments. Hopefully this was valuable. These are things that I did not know for a long time when I was using Make. So hopefully this is helpful in just understanding some of the basic principles of filters and routers and error handling and using other steps data as the output of other steps and future steps. Those are all critical things to understand. So hopefully you learn more, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Hope this was valuable. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time. I'm Chris with Boolean, where we free you up to do what you love.